Put some more information on Islam. Our last one was the rise of Islam. Today we're going to talk about the spread of Islam. This is going to be a lengthy slideshow, so bear with me because this one will take a little while. After Muhammad dies in the year 632, there was a conflict over who would be the caliph. Caliph is the successor to the messenger of God. So Muhammad was seen as the messenger of God. So now we need to know who takes over for him. The first four caliphs all had some type of connection to Muhammad. Here are those four caliphs that came next. For me personally, you're not going to need to know who these four are. Ms. Bentz might have it be a little bit different, but I'm not going to make you remember who these four people are. Ali is going to die in the year 661, and then the Umayyad caliphs would take control. They chose Damascus, which is located in Syria, to be their capital city, and the empire is going to grow at a rapid rate. So really quick, if you take a look at this map, I know it's blurry, but that's okay. The blue section on here is going to be the size of this Arab empire when Muhammad dies. This map is going to show the size of this Arab empire when the Umayyad dynasty takes control. So basically it cut off like right above Medina here at the death of Muhammad, but you can see that they've expanded greatly since that time. The Arabs had been good soldiers, but now Muslims were fighting to spread Islam as well. They believed that anybody that died in battle would go to paradise. When it says paradise, that's just referring to heaven. Muslims allowed conquered people to practice their own religion. So they did not force you to convert to Islam. They allowed you to have religious freedom. They believed that Christians and Jews were good religions as well because they also just believed in one God. However, if you were not a Muslim, you did have to pay a special tax. The Arab Empire saw many people become Muslim. Many learned Arabic as a language of religion and trade. And the term Arab meant a speaker of Arabic, not a resident of Arabia. So you could live way over in Spain, but you would be an Arab if you could speak Arabic. And speaking of Arabic, you can see the alphabet here on this slide. And to me, this is crazy because so many of you have such bad handwriting, and you know who you are if you're one of those people. I have trouble reading it sometimes. When I look at the Arabic alphabet, I think so many of these characters are incredibly similar to others. Just the second row alone, all of these look like a J to me. I would think that the way some of you write, it would be borderline impossible to read your handwriting. Muslim merchants spread Islam at trading posts. An interesting thing is today, in terms of percentage-wise, Indonesia actually has more Muslims than any other nation in the world. We generally think of the Middle East, obviously, as kind of being like the center of Islam. But in terms of one particular country or nation, Indonesia has the highest percentage of its population that is Muslim. Merchants went west into Africa, and Timbuktu is going to become a major trade center. The Muslims begin to argue over who should be the actual caliph. Two major groups are going to emerge and split the Muslim world. We have the Sunnis and the Shia. Both of these groups still exist today, and a lot of the internal struggle and some of the wars that break out amongst Muslims are between these two groups still today. So the basic beliefs of these groups. The Sunnis believe that the Umayyads can be the caliphs. They accept them even if they don't always agree with their policies. The Shia believe that all future caliphs should be a descendant of Ali. So they essentially feel like it should be more hereditary, kind of like a monarchy. Therefore, the Umayyad dynasty would have no right to rule. The Abbasid dynasty would come after the Umayyads. Many Muslim groups that were not Arab Muslims felt like they were being mistreated, so they're going to overthrow the Umayyads. The new caliph was a descendant of Muhammad's uncle, and the Abbasid dynasty would last from 750 until 1258. The new capital city during this time of the Abbasid dynasty was Baghdad. Baghdad was beside the Tigris River, and it was near the Euphrates River, which made trade very, very easy. And that's going to also make Baghdad prosper and very, very wealthy. The Muslims that were far away from the capital, so examples would be out in Spain or down in Egypt, wanted their own caliphs. The Abbasids were losing control. The empire was just a little bit too big for them to maintain. The Seljuk Turks are going to move in from Central Asia during this time as well. The Turks were great warriors, so the Abbasids hired them as soldiers. But the Turks saw just how weak the Abbasids were, so they took them over. So it's kind of ironic because the group that was hired to protect them ended up taking them over. The Seljuks would rule the government and the army only. They allowed the caliph to become or to maintain the role as a religious leader. The Seljuk leader called himself the Sultan, which means holder of power. And obviously, as we've gone through this, you've seen a lot of pictures from Aladdin. It not only happens to be my favorite Disney movie, but a lot of the positions, the time period, the area, all of those things that we're discussing throughout this PowerPoint happen to kind of align with the actual movie, even though it's obviously a little bit more happy because it's a Disney movie. The Seljuks ruled, but the Abbasid dynasty still remained. In the 1200s, the Mongols, remember we talked about them in our quick little look at Japanese feudalism. The Mongols sweep down from Central Asia. In 1258, they stormed Baghdad and they burned it to the ground. This will bring an end to the Arab empires. If you take a look at this map really quick, we'll do a little look at the Mongols later this year. But you can see the Mongols at one point pretty much controlled all of Asia, which is super, super impressive because it's the largest continent. But they're going to also be responsible for bringing an end to these Arab empires. In the late 1200s, a group of Turks in northwest Asia Minor. Remember Asia Minor, we talked about that all the way back in our chapter on ancient Greece. They're going to start their own empire. The ruler was named Osman, and it would become the Ottoman Turks and therefore the Ottoman Empire. The Ottomans captured Turkey and began attacking the Byzantine Empire. Remember, the Byzantine Empire is the same thing as the Eastern Roman Empire. In 1453, they seized Constantinople and they renamed it Istanbul. Istanbul still exists today in Turkey, and this is a snapshot of it. We'll talk about this particular building a little bit more later. Here is a map showing the Eastern Roman Empire or the Byzantine Empire. It's kind of that darker color over here to the east around the Mediterranean Sea. The Ottomans used guns, cannons, and a large navy to conquer areas around the Mediterranean, and they also called their leader a sultan. The most famous of the Ottoman sultans was Suleiman I. Suleiman ruled in the 1500s. He liked architecture, and he had many schools and mosques built. He was a brilliant military general, earning him the nickname Suleiman the Magnificent. Many religions were allowed. Again, there was religious tolerance, but just like before, if you were not a Muslim, you had to pay a special tax. As the empire grew, sultans chose viziers or officials to run different parts of the government. So this is going to be like a governor, someone that's just ruling in place in these smaller territories. Again, Jafar from Aladdin was one of these grand viziers. The Sultan created a new army of soldiers called Janissaries. A Janissary is a conquered Christian area where the boys would be then taken to Istanbul. They would be converted to Islam and trained as soldiers that were loyal to the Sultan. So a Christian area. The Muslims come in, they conquer. They're going to take the boys from this Christian territory. They take them back to Istanbul. They convert them to Islam, and they train them to fight. And they specifically are there to protect the Sultan. Sometimes Christians would even willingly give up their sons just because they knew that it would be a better life than the alternative. After Suleiman the Magnificent died, the Ottomans slowly weakened over time, but this empire would exist all the way up until World War I, and you will get to talk about this a little bit later on in your schooling, but basically the Ottomans were kind of neutral. They had the opportunity to choose which side they wanted to be a part of. Unfortunately for them, they chose the wrong side, and at the end of World War I, they were divided up amongst a variety of different countries. That is it for the slideshow on the spread of Islam.